Sanhedrin Daf Yomi how to mitigate risk. Yועצין באחיתופל, ונמלכין בסנהדרין ושואלין באורים ותומים. One of the reasons for Jewish success is that we manage risk and we mitigate risk in a very different way from the way others do, and we consider factors that other people don't consider in the way we mitigate risk. And this enables us to take risks that other people wouldn't take. It's not only in the area of business. A very chiloni person told me the other day, he spent a lot of time over the last year and a bit in the army, and he just said that the heroes of the war are the religious fighters. They have an ability to walk into situations, to walk into fire with a fearlessness that nobody else sees. And they're willing to take risks that nobody else is willing to take. They paid a heavy price, as did everyone. But there's a certain way of approaching risk that a Torah Jew has that is different from anybody else, and we'll understand how that works. We'll understand it from three questions that we'll ask on our piece of Gemara, and then with the help of two 19th century bright stars of the Torah world, the Bnei Yissaschar, in a different sefer that he wrote. He was from Poland, and some sefer from Hungary, both at about the same period, will give us insight into this specifically Jewish way of approaching risk that we'll learn out of our Gemara. The shir is dedicated to the memory of my mother. That's Maras Malia Bas Rabbi David Halevi, whose yahrzeit it is today. She played an enormous part in inspiring us and motivating us and supporting us in going to yeshiva at a time where that was not what people did. At that time, certainly in South Africa, and she wasn't from a Torah home, she was from a traditional home in South Africa, but it's important to understand that a traditional home in South Africa expressed enormous mesirus nefesh just to keep tradition, to keep kashrus in the little towns in which they lived. She grew up in little towns in South Africa. To keep kashrus, what it meant to bring a shochet to the town, for a small community to pay for a shochet. Every little community had a rebbe to teach the children. They had a shochet who was sometimes the same person, but sometimes wasn't. Sometimes the communities were just barely a million of people, a little bit more than that. But they had a rebbe, they had a shochet, or they would bring meat from the nearest place to eat. There was a lot of mesirus nefesh. They kept Shabbos as they could. It wasn't like the United States where there was a mass abandonment of Yiddishkeit. In South Africa, people held on to what they could. It wasn't always enough, but they held on to what they could, and that's why when the Baal Tshuva movement started, there was this massive return back, because nobody drifted too far from Yiddishkeit. And she was from such a family, coming from such a family, and supporting her children going off to yeshiva for years, not to become rabbis. At that time, you went to study, then everybody would ask, are you going to be an accountant? Are you going to be a lawyer? You're studying law, you're going to yeshiva, you're going to be a rabbi. She never wanted us to be rabbis. She wanted us each to have an independent way of earning a living, and yet was enormously supportive of us learning Torah, and also an enormous ba'alat emunah. She had unbelievable faith and emunah, which she certainly was able to give to her children, so we're eternally grateful to her. So the Mishnah said, "Ein motziin lemilchemet hareshut ela al pi beit din shel 71." If you to declare war, the Jewish people needs a Sanhedrin of 71. What's a milchemet reshut? Says Rashi, "Ki kol milchama kari reshut levad mi milchemet Yehoshua." It's quite interesting at the moment. The term milchemet mitzvah gets thrown out a lot. People must go to say milchemet mitzvah. Everybody has to go to war. People have to stop learning Torah and go to the war. It's not so simple what a milchemet mitzvah is and what a milchemet reshut. A milchemet mitzvah is where we're instructed to go to war by Hashem, by the Torah, and a milchemet reshut is where we decide to go. We go to war. Rashi says the only milchemet mitzvah was lichbosh b'milchemet Yehoshua lichbosh et Eretz Yisrael. The original war of Yehoshua to conquer Eretz Yisrael, that was milchemet mitzvah. Everything else is a milchemet reshut. Now, so Rashi takes a very narrow definition, but it could be that that's for the purposes just of that mitzvah, because the Rambam takes a much wider definition of what a milchemet mitzvah is, and included in that, he says, Ve'ezrat Yisrael miyad tzar sheba alehem. Anytime you've got to help the Jewish people to avoid an attack where they're attacked, which would include what we're experiencing today. That's also a milchemet mitzvah. And yet on the Mishnah, the Rambam says a milchemet mitzvah is just milchemet Amalek v'shiva amamin bilvad. Bilvad, he adds Amalek, just the conquest of the land and the war against Amalek, because that's a mitzvah in the Torah. So in the terms, there's quite a spectrum of how you define what a milchemet mitzvah is. Be that as it may, you need 71 people on the Beis Din to decide to go to war on a milchemet reshut. Ask the Gemara, where do we get this from? So the Gemara brings the story from Rabbi Shimon Chasidah, and the famous story, we have it in Brochus Daf Gimel as well. Kinor hayat talui lema'ala mimitato shel David. There was a harp hanging at David's bed. And the harp used to start playing when the wind started blowing in the middle of the night. That used to wake David up. He would get up at midnight and he would learn until the early hours of the morning, until dawn. When dawn came, the Chachomim of the Jewish people came to David HaMelech, and they would say, Adoneinu HaMelech, Amcha Yisrael tzrichim leparnasa. The Jewish people need the economy to work. We need the markets need to open, and there needs to be trade. Amar lehem d'chu vitparnasuzem. He says, sit and go and trade with one another. Why are you coming to me? Amru ein hakomitz masbi'a et ha'ari ve'en habor mitmalei michulyato. However you interpret that, there are different interpretations of it, but basically they're saying there isn't economic capacity to support the poor people. The economy just doesn't have sufficient momentum, it doesn't have sufficient capacity to be able to support the needs of the poor people. Then go to war, go and conquer somebody or something and find additional resources that way. Yועצין באחיתופל, they would then go out and have a meeting with Achitophel, who was the wise man of the time. ונמלכין בסנהדרין, they would then ask permission from the Sanhedrin. ושואלין באורים ותומים, and they would ask the Urim ותומים. Those were the three steps that they would take in order to make that decision. So the three questions that I have on the Gemara is, firstly, if you're going to ask the Urim Tumim in any case, why go through the stages of Achitophel and the Sanhedrin? You've got an Urim Tumim. We're talking about the days where there was an Urim Tumim. In the second time of the second Beis HaMedrash, they didn't ask the Urim Tumim because it didn't function. But in the first Beis HaMedrash, they had the Urim Tumim. Why go and ask anybody else? Go straight to the Urim Tumim. Secondly, was this a conversation every morning? It seems from the Gemara that this was David's routine. Just as it says, he used to wake up in the middle of the night, the wind would blow. We're getting his daily routine, his morning routine, the morning practice. See, online they're always telling you, I often point out how they're giving you all this advice online about the best morning practices. These are the 5 things you should do every morning. These are the 10 things you should do every morning. If you make a list of them, they're all very good things. But if you make a list of them, there are about 150 things you should do every morning. By the time you finish doing them, it's time for Ma'ariv already. There's something else you can do. So you've got to cut it down. What are you going to do first thing in the morning? So we see what David's routine was. And was that every morning at dawn the Chachomim would come and say, David HaMelech, I know we discussed this yesterday, but we've got a Shaila again today. It's the same as yesterday. What do we do? There's not enough. Does this all get practiced? That doesn't make sense. And did David not know that there was a problem with the economy, that the economy couldn't support the poor people? Why does he suggest that they go and do business with one another? And most importantly of all, why does David say go and conquer other territories? That's a little bit not a politically correct way to go about things. Why didn't he say get into export and import? If our domestic economy can't support the poor people, start exporting, start trading with other nations. Why conquer other nations? So to understand the Gemara, we have to look at the Rashi in Brochus, which is based on the Posuk in Shmuel, where David asks the Urim Tumim, should I go and smite the Plishtim? Asks the Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Memhei, what is he asking the Urim Tumim? Are you asking the Urim Tumim, may I go and conquer the Plishtim? You can't ask the Urim Tumim something which you could ask the Beis Din. There's a Gadol B'Yisrael, Shmuel's there. Go and ask Shmuel the question. You don't go to the Urim Tumim. What he's asking the Urim Tumim is whether he will be successful or not. Says Rashi, you're not allowed to ask the Urim Tumim, am I allowed to do something? That you ask the Rov. That you ask the Beis Din. things of Issa Veheta. That's not the Urim V'Tumim's job to answer what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. So what do you ask the Urim V'Tumim? You ask the Urim V'Tumim whether you're going to be Matzliach, which is therefore the basis of Rashi in Brochus on the same sugi which is paralleled in Brochus. Yועצין באחיתופל, what did they ask Achitofel? Ezoru aderech yelchu. What are the tactics? How do we go about this? Let's plan the war. That's what they did with Achitofel. Then the Sanhedrin, not lin mehem reshut. The Sanhedrin, they went to ask permission. David HaMelech has told us to go to war. Achitofel has told us where and how to do that. Is that in order? May we do that? Why are they asking Sanhedrin for permission? The kings told them to do it already. What permission do they need from the Sanhedrin? Because they want the Sanhedrin to daven. An army needs people davening. That's what you need. In 1967, when the Ponevezh Rov said to Moshe Dayan, the Yeshiva Bochrim are at your service, tell us what we can do. And he said, right now what you can do is say Tehillim. That was Moshe Dayan, that's what I need you to do. He said, I might need you to dig graves, but at the moment, say Tehillim, daven. An army needs tefillah. And a lot of the soldiers, as you know very well, in the current war, have told us, even secular soldiers, that they felt the tefillah, they felt the support of Am Yisrael that cared for them, and they felt the power of the tefillah. ושואלין באורים ותומים. So what are you asking the Urim Vatumim? Im yatzlichu. That's where Rashi gets it from the Gemara in Eruvin. So let's look at the Ma'agid Ta'alumah first, who's the Bnei Yissaschar. Bnei Yissaschar is from the Hasidic world. He's a Talmud of the Choseh Lublin, who was a Talmud of the Maggid Memezrich, who was a Talmud of the Baal Shem Tov. So he's right in the direct line of the Hasidic tradition. And he says clearly they had to follow what David said. David told them to go to war. That wasn't an issue. But they asked Achitofel how they should go about it, as Rashi says in Brochus. And why did that have to be before the Sanhedrin? Shouldn't they have gone to the Sanhedrin first? David HaMelech says, go to war, go to the Sanhedrin and say, do you agree? Is that okay? May we? The reason to go to the Sanhedrin is to daven. If you want tefillah, you've got to be very specific in tefillah. You've got to daven for the right thing. You've got to daven specifically. A generic tefillah is not nearly as powerful as a specific tefillah. Ki hamitzpalel tzarich lefarsho b'shibvate, as the Zohar says. When you daven, you must articulate exactly what you're davening for. So they go to Achitofel to say, David says we must go and engage in war in order to expand the economy. Who should we battle with? Who should we go? How do we do this? Once they have a strategy from Achitofel, they take the strategy to the Sanhedrin. And they say, this is what we're planning to do. Can we have your blessing and your tefillah to go this way? Chazal tell us that Amalek changed his strategy so that the Jews wouldn't be able to daven. At the bottom in the footnote, I bring the Rashi in Parshas in Bamidbar, where it says that Kanani Yoshev Benegev, where the Kanani were living in the Negev. Rashi says that wasn't Kanani, it was Amalek. V'shina et l'shono ledaber b'lashon Kna'an. And they were crafty, the Amalekim. They started talking to one another in Canaanite. Kadesh Yisrael mitpalalim la'Kadosh Baruch Hu latet Knaanim biyadam v'hem einam Knaanim. So that the Jews would daven to beat the Knaanim in war, and they're not Knaanim. So you can't say, yes, but Hashem knows what you mean. No, it doesn't work like that. A tefillah has to be very specific. There's an art to tefillah. There's a science to tefillah. One has to learn how to daven. And when one knows how to daven, one's learned how to daven, that's umnus aviyem shebiyodem. That's, Chazal say, the Jewish people have a trade that they learned, a profession that they learned from their forefathers. Tefillah. Tefillah is a profession. If one knows how to daven, the power of davening is very great. So they had to go to the Sanhedrin and tell them specifically, this is our strategy. These are our tactics. Can you daven for our success for this specific tactic? And then they would go to the Urim Vatumim. The tefillah had to be in place before you went to the Urim Vatumim. Because what are you going to the Urim Vatumim to ask? Will we be successful? Well, the Urim Tumim would need to know, are you davening or aren't you? You haven't given me the full strategy, so the Urim Tumim will say. Once you've told me exactly what you're planning, and I know that the Sanhedrin is behind you, then I can answer whether you'll be matzliach or not. You're not giving enough information to the Urim Tumim if you don't have the blessing of the Sanhedrin when you go to ask the Shaila. And says the Magid Ta'aluma, and what would happen if the Urim Tumim said, no, you won't be successful? It says, then you loop back. You can't go back to David, because David has already said you've got to go to war. But you go back to Achitofel, and you say that we took your strategy, we put it to the Sanhedrin approved and said they would daven, but the Urim Tumim said we won't be successful. Okay, Achitofel would then say, let's design a new strategy, let's go about it differently. And so they would go on until the Urim Tumim would say, yes, for this you'll be successful. And why is it that David HaMelech told them to go to war rather than to trade with the Goyim? The Chassam Sofer says an amazing thing. The Chassam Sofer says, at that time, you couldn't trade with the rest of the world because BDS was in place. The rest of this is not a new thing, BDS. The rest of the world refused to trade with Yisrael. If the rest of the world refuses to trade Yisrael, what is Israel supposed to do to expand its economy? It has to go to war. It has no choice. And the Chassam Sofer says that Am Yisrael says to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he bases it on the Medrash in Eichel, Ata garamta sinatam aleinu. What is the cause of anti-Semitism? Says the Medrash, God is the cause of anti-Semitism. Al sheivdaltanu mehem b'chol mikol kol. You've made us so different. You've made us so odd in the world that the world doesn't accept us as that. It's your fault. You, Rebbeinu Shalom, did that to us. It's just part of the nature of who we are. There's no way that they're going to accept us. And in many periods of history, the non-Jews have refused to trade with the Jews. If we're not able to trade, the only thing is to pashtu yedechem b'gedud. And the other thing that Chassam Sofer says to us, this didn't happen every day. That the Chachamim came into to David HaMelech to speak. So some people are mefarish. It didn't happen every day. It happened once like this, which is difficult to understand because that's not the pshat of the Gemara. It says the Chassam Sofer, this conversation went on in David's head. Nobody actually came and knocked on his door. Every morning he would wake up, worrying about the Jewish people, worrying about their economy, worrying about expanding their economy, understanding that there might be a need to go to war, preparing for war. That's the first thing he did. Alot HaShachar, after he'd learned Torah since midnight, he would apply his mind to the needs of the nation because that was at the center of his thinking. That's what happened. And we see from this a whole process for managing risk. So the first thing is David HaMelech spends several hours learning Torah. When you're looking at a risky situation, the first thing you've got to do is define very carefully in your mind, who am I? Not just what do I want to do, who am I? And you get that from the learning of Torah. I'm a Torah Jew. That's where you start. Your values are intact. The next thing is, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because there's an economic need. I'm not going to war because of imperialism and expansionism. I'm going because there's an economic need. If there are other ways to expand the economy, I'll seek other ways to economy. And to say, understand why you're doing it. Because once you know why you're doing something, it opens a possibility of innovation. Because there might be other ways to solve the problem. It doesn't necessarily have to be this way. And then you've got to work out the strategy. And then you've got to take the strategy down to a tactical level. That's Achitofel. So now you've got it. This is who I am. This is why I'm doing it. This is what I'm doing. This is the tactics. Before you measure this, then you add in tefillah. And now I've got to daven. I've got to be sure that what I'm doing is right. I've got to daven and be sure that what I'm doing is right. If you've got the Urim Tumim, you use the Urim Tumim. If you've got the Torah, you can ask Talmidei Chachamim to get an answer, or you're able to access the Ratzon Hashem in some other way. So you start off, who am I? I'm a Ben Torah, I'm learning Torah. Why am I doing this? To expand the economy. What am I doing? Poshet Yadehem Begedud. Tactics, Achitofel develops the tactics. Tefillah, may I be successful in these tactics. And now adding tefillah into your portfolio of assets, into your weaponry, understanding I've also got tefillah. Now measure whether I'm going to be successful. You don't start off, if you start off with success too early, you get afraid. You hold back. But if you go all the way to tefillah and you daven to the Ribono Shel Olam and you're satisfied that what you're doing is for the right reason, it's the right thing for the right reason, and that there'll be siyata dishmaya, you're willing to take a level of risk that very often other people would never consider taking. And with that, the opportunity for the Jewish people to manage their risk in this particular way leads them to a level of success that others can't achieve.